Welcome squad, good morning, afternoon and evening. I am here to report after the first day of Season 4, at the very least for me, from Europe. We have now gotten the two new main attractions of this shorter season, which are the new Mythic Plus with the new affix and the brand old new set of dungeons in the season, and the new cycling set of raids with this Mythic Plus style affix attached to the bosses. I've got to try a whole bunch of them. I've got to run Heroic, Castle Nathria, Mythic, Castle Nathria, a whole bunch of keys. I've tried to get into early the newer dungeon, the more fresh dungeons rather than just running streets or Gambit again. And I am here to report my findings on the season so far. So the first finding we have to go through before we even get into the more detailed features is the bugs, is the problems of the patch. So in case you haven't been aware, especially if you haven't actually raided yet whatsoever in the patch, there were several problems, apparently according to Blizzard caused by the affix system attached to the raid. So this caused, for example, atonement healing of Discipline Priests to not work at all. It caused feral spirits of enhancement shamans to not do damage. It caused ignite to not do damage at all for fire mages. It also caused things like beast cleave of beast mastery hunters to not do damage whatsoever. So there were plenty of bugs right at the release of the patch. I think it was something along the lines of any type of damaging ability that used to do damage to the primary target and then splash damage or AoE damage to other targets was bugged and wasn't working. So you had the situation where basically players could not play Discipline Priest but only Holy. They could not play Beast Mastery Hunter but only Marksmanship, or they could not play Fire Mage but just Frost Mage because nobody plays Arcane. So that was apparently now, because we finished raiding after the hotfix came through, but apparently we have gotten this hotfix which has made things smoother in the raid. There were also a few other issues and problems and bugs here and there. For example, one of the top logs right now on Warcraft logs are some mythic boss kills in something like 50-second fights. The bosses apparently were in Mythic, but their HP was the HP, I think, of LFR bosses. So people were just able to just zerg them down, for example. Again, there were quite a few bugs in the raid. Definitely, let's just say way more bugs than you would usually see. I'm trying to go back and remember when Sanctum was released, when Sepulchre was released. Certainly there were a few hiccups here and there, but nowhere near the amount of fuck-ups that we have had about this season. Then we also go into something that perhaps is even worse because it's Mythic Plus. You know, Mythic Plus, and this is something we will talk about in this video, because raiding is so much easier this patch, the real more competitive side of the PvE environment will likely stay in Mythic Plus. So it was quite surprising to see so many issues in Mythic Plus. Unlike the raid, they weren't as much about the bugs, okay? It wasn't something that was just broken by itself. It was mostly about lack of balancing. So to give you an example, right now you could go and look at keys like one of the current keys, for example, the Tazavesh keys that we have gotten for this expansion already. You can see keys from Solia's Gambit, which can go all the way up to the plus 21, plus 22, even plus 23 level right now. You can look at Streets of Wonder and it's pretty much the same thing. When it starts to get really fucky and really weird is when you start to get into Karazhan. Because Karazhan the lower part of Karazhan has keys in the 18-ish range right now as the highest completed keys, and the upper Karazhan somewhat similar, 18 to 19 range right now. And as I said, it mostly doesn't really have to do with glaring major bugs in the keys themselves, but more about the balancing of these dungeons at the moment. So if you're reading this now as you just got home and you were thinking about playing a whole bunch of keys, if you haven't seen any more posts from Blizzard devs mentioning that some of these keys were hotfixed with nerfs, then you're gonna save yourself some time and some sanity if you simply skip Karazhan, especially for the moment, and simply do Mechagon, Tazavesh and the two Warlords dungeons. That is probably going to be better for you. Now, talking about the experience of it, my experience in Mythic Plus has been, of course, a nightmare. I have perhaps jinxed myself yesterday in yesterday's video when I said I was excited about getting into those old Mythic Plus dungeons again, only to be reminded that there are going to be many people who have absolutely no idea what any of these dungeons do, but they have the item level, they have the tier sets, they have the double legendary, and they're gonna go and queue up in keys in the 15 or even the 20 range while being completely clueless, and the result was a pain. A very big pain. I must have left or disbanded something like 7 keys in a row within the first 10 minutes because players were just completely unaware of the mechanics, you know. But by the time you get to the first boss of Iron Docks, nobody has any idea what to do. Everyone gets one shot by the dog. You try to do the first boss of Mechagon Workshop, and once again players are not quite aware of what the strat is in that first boss, or even worse, the second boss, wiping because players stay right next to the bosses as they are about to be leapt on by the boss, causing a wipe. So it was quite the harrowing experience. It was expected to a degree that, of course, players are going to have a certain time for adjusting to the new keys. Of course, not everyone was playing in BFA, and even sometimes if you were playing in BFA, they weren't even into the dungeons themselves. The same goes for Legion, and even further back for Warlords with Iron Docks and Grimrail Depot. So it's gonna take a while, also because the keys have been so high this season. Many people were just queuing up into plus 18 or plus 20 keys because they did a plus 20 Necrotic Wake last season and they thought it was going to be just as easy. So in a couple of weeks we're going to start getting a much more even spread of players, I guess, skill level across all of the keys in Mythic Plus. It's going to be much easier to find your own equals, your own match as a group in Mythic Plus. Talking about Mythic Plus, this is something we are going to be going a little bit more in detail, I think, by this weekend, perhaps by the last few days of this reset. So for now, we can only take a very minor sneak peek of the specs that are being brought in Mythic Plus. The first thing to notice is that for the first time, even in lower keys, so to speak, keys higher than 15 only, Prot Paladin has lost much more than its previous seasons. It used to be a much more popular spec until you started to get into the very high key levels. Instead now, it's narrowly losing to Brewmaster Monk. Of course, Blood Death Knight is still the far and away most popular tank. One other prediction of mine came through, which is the one about healers. I said Holy Priest started to become more and more popular throughout Season 3, but not since the start, which is what kept Shaman as the most popular spec overall in Season 3 for Mythic Plus. Now you can already see that even in keys higher than 15, even in the first couple of days of this season, Priest is already matching, if not narrowly above, a Restoration Shaman compared to Season 3, and this should continue to progress like this and be quite perhaps a little bit higher as you get into the highest of keys. No real progression for the other specs. The other specs were kind of expected to stay there. After all, nothing really changes this tier for Discipline, for Mistweaver, or for Holy Paladin. Same goes for Resto Druid. Not too surprising, obviously not too surprising that the very small, very tiny nerf given to Survival hasn't made them move away from the meta. Another interesting transition, similar to the transition between Holy Priest and Resto Shaman, is the transition to Outlaw Rogues. We have talked about Outlaw getting buffed and becoming more and more powerful over time, but that was too late into the season, right? Even if they started growing percentage by percentage from 0% basically all the way up to 8%, Subtlety Rogue was still the way to go for rogues. Now, just a couple of days into the new season, Outlaw is easily, far and away, of course, the dominating spec for rogues, and currently the second most popular of melee specs in Mythic Plus. The other two specs that were popular already are Fury and Windwalker, and they still are, so far. No real changes. It's gonna be much more interesting to see the changes when it comes to the range DPS, given that Destruction Warlock has received a more heavy nerf compared to Survival. So at the moment they are still ahead, they are still first, and they are still the strongest, but Marksmanship, as well as Fire Mage, but also more importantly Demolock, they are growing a lot compared to previous seasons. Of course, by the time we start getting into the really high keys this season, perhaps the situation will just go back to being what it was last season. But for now, I'm gonna be happy and want to believe that this situation of more even, of more average spread of popularity of specs is going to remain for a little bit more. As for the raid, so the raid doesn't quite have enough data right now to check, and as I said, some of the specs were completely broken at start. As you can see here, Fire Mage is basically unplayable, so the poor souls who played Fire realized the problem once they played it. But we can start seeing other things in the raid. One of the questions about the raid itself is whether or not it is too simple, whether or not it is too easy. Of course, not many people will complain. After all, it's gonna be just free loot, free high item level loot, and a much more easily accessible, I guess, difficulty level. Perhaps some guilds that were stuck at just doing heroic and then calling it quits, or mid-tier guilds that usually would progress halfway through a mythic raid and then just stop. In this season, it's going to be much easier for these type of guilds to progress through mythic. Of course, you have the problem, so to speak, that these raids are going to cycle every week, so effectively you only have 1 week to have your progress in each of the raids. But I don't think, even as I got into mythic today, or rather yesterday, that they are too easy. You know, knowing what this season is going to be about, knowing about the layout of the season, I don't think they are necessarily too hard. We have pretty much one shot and went through fucking up mechanics and people making mistakes left and right and still killed the first 4-5 mythic bosses in an hour, so it was quite easy. Though again, my guild is definitely a more competitive type of mythic guild, so for the much more broad part of the player base, it's going to be a decent challenge. Not to mention that once you get to the later bosses, it's going to be significantly harder. And of course, you still have only 1 week every 3 weeks to defeat each of the bosses in Mythic. So I do think, as I said at the start, that more or less the deeper competitive side this season is going to be in Mythic Plus. You know, for once, raiding won't be the be-all, end-all of PvE. Most of that is going to be laid in Mythic Plus instead. Of course, you have the thing that even with the raid made easier, you still have the juiciest loot coming from the raid. Mythic Plus did definitely get a major help this season, because you do have the no cap on your Valor, which means you can just spam your Mythic Plus keys, your easy keys, just to go as fast as possible, you know, your plus 15 keys to 3-chest them and whatnot, and get a bunch of Valor to upgrade all of your gear, so it's definitely better. But at the end of the day, your 304 item level, your 311 item level pieces of gear are going to be obtained from Mythic raiding still. So while that is still true for raiding is made easier, which means it's going to be much more accessible to players to get those type of rewards. Same goes for the other two features of the raid, the dinars for you to acquire your best in slot items, plus the upgrade items from heroic and mythic to transform the items you loot into heroic version from the heroic tokens, or into the mythic version with the mythic tokens. So I think overall it is a very smooth and very laid back and chill, entertaining season, particularly if you enjoy Mythic Plus more. Or maybe if you enjoy Mythic Plus but you never had the chance to get into it more seriously, perhaps you didn't have that much time to play and most of that time was taken up by the raid, etc, etc. This season is definitely going to leave you more room to get into Mythic Plus, considering how much more straightforward and simple the raiding side of PvE content is going to be. So Mythic Plus is definitely the more standout feature for this season compared to the raid. As I said, my only hiccups at the start of this season have been the bugs and the issues with the bosses, but not just the bosses, the abilities of the players themselves not working in the raid. But apparently most of these, I'm not gonna say all of them because I haven't checked properly, but most of these have been fixed already. So okay, fine. In just a couple of days they have been fixed. Let's just hope this is not gonna repeat itself in Sanctum. So we have to have another couple of days next week where things are not gonna work and are gonna be broken. Let's hope Blizzard can have some foresight and fix that as well before we get into the Sanctum fated week. And the other issue about Mythic Plus I also think should be fixed somewhat soon. The main issues are the Karazhan dungeons being a tiny bit overtuned right now, and the mini-boss. the Dreadlord mini-boss, which seems to be quite a drag at the moment, especially the Blood Shield. Something like the Akar mechanic that is gonna make you drag the fight, drag the combat with the mini-boss for quite a long time, which gets a little bit boring and sort of is sort of a slog whenever you fight it. So I wish perhaps even increasing the damage it does, you know, making the bat more threatening, reducing the cast time of his mind control or something in return for making it a little bit easier to kill. That would be another one of my fixes I would have at the start of this season. But with this being said, I can call it for a close for today. This one being the whole recap of this first day, this first couple of days of Season 4. We can leave each other for the rest of this Thursday. Of course, thank you guys again for watching the video and for helping to grow and support the channel, which in this case, first in line are my Patreon supporters, right over here. Round of applause as usual for allowing me and letting me continue to produce and deliver content to you about WoW as we get deeper and deeper into this Dragonflight Alpha plus Beta season. We're gonna be able to dish out more and more content about it as well, so it's nice to know I have your support as I continue in this endeavor. Also, you can continue to support myself by liking and commenting down below on this video as well. You can let me guys know what has been so far the highlight of the start of this season for you, whether it is something from the raid, whether it is something from Mythic Plus, or whether it is something about the forgotten PvP, those poor guys, as well as of course subscribing to the channel as well. To close out this PR and social nonsense part of the video, you can follow me on Twitter as well as subscribe to my Patreon right down at these links. Okay, now we are done. Thank you guys again, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, yes, I did get a lot of loot, however, half of this loot was garbage. Unusable mastery haste crap. Yes, I know what a first world problem to have, however, I'm still triggered.